Okay, this is An Eye Toward the Occult with me, your host, who shall remain nameless. So let's just go for it. So what I'd like to talk about right now is what I take to be the relationship, philosophically speaking, between Christianity or Christian spiritual practices and witchcraft or magical spiritual practices. I mean, that's a bit redundant. I guess I should just say magical practices. But so okay. So what is the relationship between these two things? Well, so I think there's two sides to it. I mean, the first is maybe the more obvious side, which is that these two things are opposed. Now that has to be true on some level, because when taken as philosophical systems or as narratives about where the world came from and where it is now and where it's going, they're not the same, and there's elements which lie in contradistinction to each other. So for example, Christianity would have you believe that the world or the universe is or was created by God, a very particular God, or sort of God, and that this God at some point became a human being, whatever that means, and redeemed the sins of the world, right? There's the whole bit about the cross and the resurrection. So, as should be obvious, most practitioners of witchcraft and most magicians, I mean, not all people who have a magical practice belong to the Wiccan community or see themselves as practicing witchcraft. I think a lot would see those labels as being unnecessary, and that they're just implementing. Certainly chaos magicians would say that they're not really of the same school, and that theirs is not so much a religion as it is a technology or a method. So fair enough. But the basic point here is that, look, a Wiccan, which I'm not really, a Wiccan is going to be somebody who, for the most part, has some cosmology. They believe in the god and the goddess, or the masculine and the feminine principle, or something. They're usually nature worshippers in some fundamental sense. And so, that's all different, right? Having a god and a goddess is different than having a god that became a human being at a certain point, and so on and so on. But insofar as that's obvious, I'm not sure that's worth dwelling on. And, that's something that could be said about all the different religions and philosophies, is that, sure, on the surface, they're different. That's not really that's not really useful or worth knowing, I guess. Now, the question really, right, is, okay, well, in terms of practice or one's fundamental relationship to the divine or whatever, are these things essentially different? I don't know. I think that depends on the individual. And so, which is a way of saying, there could be a Christian or someone who identifies as a Christian who is really not in contact with any spiritual source. And then there could be someone who says that they are a Wiccan or a witch or a practitioner of witchcraft or magic or something, and they're not really. So we have to, in terms of our interfacing with individuals, we can never really know where someone else is at. But in terms of, the philosophical relationship between these two systems or practices, I think in terms of cosmology, sure. Insofar as Wiccanism, or Wicca, has a cosmology that is different than the Christian cosmology, sure. But practice-wise, I don't think they're all that different. Now, that might sound a bit unusual, as it might seem at first glance like the practices of witchcraft are the exact opposite, are antithetical to Christian practices like prayer or worship or what have you. So, look, this isn't an original point. This is a point that has been made before me by Jason Louv, who is an excellent resource on these sorts of things. He's an occultist and an author and a historian of John Dee, or a biographer of John Dee, who established the British Empire and was super into magical practices, and had an enormous influence on the current shape of the world. Anyway, so Jason Louv basically makes this point that, when you break it down, prayer and then certainly other things that go on in, say, Roman Catholicism are forms of ritual magic. I mean, when you get down on your knees and you pray to your God to intercede in the world on your behalf and manifest change, that's ritual magic. I mean, where do you think that comes from? I mean, that comes from, shamans way back doing the same thing and getting down on their knees and putting on some fur coats and praying to the god of the hunt to intercede on behalf of the tribe and, bring to them in today's hunt a plump, juicy deer, right? Now, there are also, non-pagan, we can just cast this in metaphysical terms or ontological terms, or maybe psycho-spiritual terms, right? We don't have to even necessarily think of Christian prayer or Christian spiritual practices as forms of shamanism, although that's what they are. That's what all forms of religious practice are. But that's, I suppose, for another time. It all goes back to the witch doctor, right, in his hut at the edge of the village with his plants and his medicines and his rituals. So, in any case, let's just take Christian prayer, intercessory prayer, petitionary prayer. This is a spiritual practice which, is very much, there's a one-to-one correspondence, we might say. There are direct parallels. There's a mirroring structurally of the practices or the fundamental understanding of what goes on in a magic ritual. So, take a bit of ritual magic, right? I don't want to name any specific rituals for right now, but I don't know. Let's say you do some sigil magic, right? A symbol ritual. That's something where what you're doing is, we can think of that in a secular way, basically, as what you're doing is you're engaging in some activity which is deeply meaningful to your subconscious mind and which harnesses its energies in some constructive way. Or you can see that if you do think something metaphysically is going on, in a magical practice, which I'm inclined to, you can see it as, some combination of, will and material action and the geometry of a ritual, and the intent, and all those things perhaps are coming together to form a mass of conscious energy, or some mass of consciousness that goes out into the fabric of space-time. Who knows? All I'm saying is you can have some sort of purely metaphysical understanding of what a magical practice is, which is sort of what I do, or you can think of it in these other terms as analogous to shamanism or whatever. But the point is that there's no way out of the conclusion that even as mundane a Christian practice as Christian spiritual practice as prayer is a magical practice at its root, and whatever you think is going on there is the exact same thing. I mean, it's just different words. We're looking at the same plant and then just using different words for different branches, but it's I think it's time that, what you see too often in occult circles or in Christian circles or whatever is this acceptance of the premise that these things are diametrically opposed. A lot of people in Christian circles, as we've seen, will sort of suffer from what we might call the satanic panic, and anyone who is interested or engaged in the occult must surely be some Darth Vader like figure who is bound to the dark side. But then on the other hand, you see sometimes in occult circles with occultists and practitioners and witches, you see a real aversion, a real revulsion, a real distaste for Christianity and Catholicism and things like that. And I don't think either of those perspectives quite make sense, or at the very least don't see the whole picture here. And certainly if we're trying to secularize these things or make magic a science, if there's anything to it, we need to think of these things as, natural laws, or as natural phenomena, or at the very least as phenomena that can be understood. And so as, things that are going to be, phenomena that we're going to observe in other places and cultures and under different names. And it's a little silly to think that, anyone who uses the terms witchcraft or the occult or whatever, has found anything truly unique. I mean, there are certainly, I think, in some forms of magic, like chaos magic and other forms, precisifications of what the kind of magic that goes on in, say, the practice of Christian prayer. But, the fundamental point here is that these things are different faces or facets of the same jewel, which is the human, the power and potential of the human spirit, and specifically its power to manifest material change. So, it's worth keeping in mind in terms of, just being sensitive to one another's subcultures, that these things can have terms, that are scary to one another. But it's also worth keeping in mind that we are all magicians, and we always have been, and that even people who have no religious experience or upbringing have been engaging in all kinds of rituals to manifest change without even knowing it. Even getting together with your friends to have your jam session every week, right, becomes in time, soon enough, very clearly a ritual. And the ritualization of that activity gives it even more power and meaning, and facilitates its accomplishing what it is meant to accomplish. So, hopefully I've offered some food for thought. I really do have to go, but more to come for sure.